Holy crap, I don't know who the hell we think we are when we do something like that.
What's up, fight fans? This is episode 1 of the Combat Connection, live on Cageside Press social media platform. I'm your host, Brett Cagle, and we have a loaded show for you today, recapping UFC Fight Night from China and also looking ahead to the PFL World Championships this week. Joining me today will be a good friend of mine and a leading voice in the Midwest MMA scene, BJPenn.com and Sports Illustrated's MMA Knockouts own Zain Bando. Formerly, this show was on SportsTownChicago.com and the Live Take Sports app, but I'm more than excited to be here at our new home of Cageside Press. Thanks for joining me today, Zain. It's a pleasure to be with you as always. It's been a while since we've been on a live show here, but we've got a lot to talk about with the PFL and UFC this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me on as your first guest, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks again, man.
Yeah, so we had the Chinese card last week for the UFC. In the main event, Peter Yan took on Davison Figueiredo, two former world champions. Yan won this fight 50-45. I thought it was competitive throughout. Now, I think he did win 5 rounds, but Davison Figueiredo made a good showing for himself. He really made a rise up the rankings in the bantamweight division since moving up from 125. What did you make of the main event? And do you think Peter Yan has enough left in the tank to make a push towards a championship?
Yeah, I mean, he looked great. He really didn't show any weaknesses at all. His striking looked good. His volume looked good. His head movement was good. Really did frustrate Figueiredo at times. Didn't really let him breathe. And there were very few spots where you just felt like, okay, Peter Yan's in a dangerous or precarious position. I think he looked good. And it was one of those fights too where you just sort of knew, okay, if Yan could push the championship pace, but he's known for pushing. I'm not saying Figueiredo has yet to do that. Figueiredo is a former champion in himself, but I think I think Yan's just overall in cage activity really did show in this fight. And I'll be honest with you, this was one of those fights that I got wrong when making predictions. Full disclosure, I went 6-7 on this card, this being one of my 7 losses. And I thought that, Figgy would fight a little bit better. I thought he caught him late in the fight. Could have finished him if he had a little bit more time. But overall, I mean, the numbers show it significant strikes-wise in favor of Yan. So, I mean, overall, a good fight, a good main event for the Chinese, or for the Macau China audience, if you will. And overall, one of those fights where Yan remains in the mix in a loaded bantamweight division. Obviously, you have Umar Nurmagomedov still waiting in the wings for a title shot. I think he's the rightful number 1 contender. And I think the fight that you do next for Peter Yan is him and Sean O'Malley. I think a lot of people would want to see that rematch. A lot of people, including myself, thought Peter Yan won the first fight. I think they're 2 totally different fighters at this stage of their careers a few years later. And that's kind of where my head would be leaning if I'm the UFC in terms of matchmaking. I think Figueiredo has a lot of options. I still think Figueiredo is one of the best fighters in the world. I think he can move up or move down based on what he wants to do. But overall, I don't see any signs of him slowing down or anything in regards to his cardio or anything like that. I still think he looked good. I just think he ran into a guy in Peter Yan that's uber confident and definitely showed why he's a former champion. And I think his performance was outstanding. So,
yeah, I think his performance was great as well. And you alluded to the volume of Peter Yan. They're 150 to 53 in the total strike statistics there. That's a wide margin. And I was actually surprised. I as well picked Figueiredo to win this fight. I thought he looked great at 135 pounds, looked renewed. But for good reason, the odds makers had him as a near 3-1 dog. Peter Yan really surprised me in that fight, especially with his takedown early in the fight. The trip that he got on Figueiredo, that was really something awesome to see. But Figueiredo landed 2 of his own. And you mentioned he hurt him late in the 5th round. They didn't actually credit him for a knockdown in that round, but I thought that it certainly was warranted. Now, as far as what these guys have next, I think that Peter Yan calling out for Merab was a little bit too much. We just saw that fight and how that went down. Merab was able to get him on the ground pretty easily.
I agree with you
in their fight.
I agree with you, but just to stop you for a second, though, what Merab did in terms of the video he made after the fight, that's genius promotion. It reminds people of what happened in the first fight, given it wasn't the greatest fight in the world, but it at least reminds people as to, that there's still some unfinished business there from last year. Even though it may not be the most deserving fight next, you got to give it up for the champion to at least promote himself and to show that that's a future rematch and opponent that he wants. So you sort of, on the contrary, you sort of have to give him all the credit in the world because he could have just said nothing. Peter Yan could have said nothing. Rob could have not responded to it. It could have been a non-story. Now it gets people starting to think, okay, what would happen if a rematch between those two did it actually go down? So that's just something to think about on the contrary as well.
Yeah, I don't really think that fight was overly competitive. I think that Peter Yan would be 3-1, 4-1 underdog in that fight if they did it again. But as you're saying, it was smart by Merab because whichever way the UFC decides to go, whether there's an injury to Nurmagomedov and Yan has to fill in or something like that, he is promoting that fight and getting fans interested in things that aren't even to do with the Nurmagomedov matchup. So. That's always something to look at there from Merab. But Peter Yan's looked great. And at 35 years old, I was listening to the guys on Morning Combat Talk, and they were saying that, when Jose Aldo lost his belt, he was able to come back and reclaim interim gold. There's not a lot of guys at these lower weight classes, 35 plus, that are able to make title runs. In Peter Yan's case, this is a second title run. Do you think he, can beat Merab, or how do you think that matchup would look a second time around? And how do you think he'd look against Umar Nurmagomedov as well?
Yeah, well, first off, I think Umar Nurmagomedov is a tough out for anyone. And so let's just throw that out there really quick, number one. And number two, I think, could he eventually fight him again? Sure. But I don't think he's ready for it. I think this was a good, a good first win back in a while to show that he's still in that upper echelon of the division and beating a former champion. But to throw him right away into a title shot, I think is a little bit too far fetched. Do I think he has a chance to reclaim his championship? Yeah, but given how loaded the division is, I think it's going to take a while. It may not even be next year. It may even be 2026. Who knows? We really don't know. But what I at least do know is he still is championship level material, and I think that that's the most important thing to take away from this whole performance.
Yeah, absolutely. But I believe the fight to make after this is Sugar Sean O'Malley. Like you said, the top of the division is kind of jam-packed right now with Umar Nurmagomedov and Merab likely to face each other. He's looking at about 2026. That lines up for a big fight between him and O'Malley. One that some people thought that he won the first time around.
I thought he won.
Yeah, as well as Khabib Nurmagomedov when he posted that video online as well. So that was a highly controversial decision. I'm sure a lot of fight fans would love to see that a second time around. Who would you favor now after seeing their last two performances? O'Malley coming off a loss, Yan coming off a win. Who would you favor in that matchup if they were to fight once again?
It's close, man, because if the fight stays on the feet, I think Sean O'Malley can beat him. I think if it goes to the ground, I think Yan could use his wrestling as well as his sambo to really to really dictate the pace of that fight. I also think you have to factor into location. If the fight's in America, I think it's going to be skewed more towards O'Malley. And I think if the fight is in the Middle East / UAE / internationally, I think it's going to favor Yan. So I think there's a lot of factors at play. when you take a look at the fight, and it's more than just the fight. It's the optics of the fight, and it's the buzz and intrigue around the fight as well. So
yeah, I think that's the one to make. Can't wait to see that if that is what happens next. But, on the rest of this UFC China card, there were some spectacular knockouts and standout performances, even from the prelims to the co-main event. We had Muslim Salikov, who is, nearing 40 years of age, the king of Kung Fu, spinning wheel kick over San Kinan in the first round. That was, an incredible knockout from Salikov. Really turned back the clock with that performance. What'd you make of his knockout in the first round?
yeah, I mean, this knockout was great, and then there were also several other very nice finishes as well. This was overall a fun card, but he definitely was a show stealer. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that, fighting in his home country, Song Kinan would put up a little bit more of a spirited performance, but he just got caught with a strike he didn't really see. We've seen Muslim Salikov go to war with guys like Ponzinibbio in the past, so we know how tough he is. But, showing off the technique at 40 years old, that was certainly impressive. But it might not even have been the best knockout of the night. Certainly was on the main card, but we had Wong Kong got upset by Gabriel Fernandez. That's worth noting as we go down the main card here real quick. A rear naked choke in round one. Kong was the biggest favorite on this card, 17-1, minus 1,700 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Got upset in the first round by Gabriel Fernandez there. What'd you make of that upset? I was certainly shocked that, Kong was, hurt on the feet and then finished on the ground like that also in her home country.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't catch that particular fight until after it was over, so I was just as surprised as probably everyone. Definitely a huge upset. I certainly didn't expect that. I thought Kong would either win by decision or by late finish. I'm blanking on what I had her at, but yeah, definitely very impressive for and also one of those fights too where it's one of those finishes where you just least expect it, and I'm sure it stunned the China crowd, as I think Galaxy Arena was literally or nearly dead silent when that fight was over. So yeah, definitely a very, very good performance for her, and one of those fights where Kong is gonna have to go back to the drawing board. We'll probably see her on one of these fight nights in either February or March, I would assume. So
yeah. And, one of the fights that I was surprised, wasn't higher up on the card was Carlos Ulberg and Volkan Oezdemir. We had two ranked light heavyweight contenders there. Me and you actually saw Ulberg in his last performance before this one, knocking out Alonzo Menefield in around 11 seconds. That was impressive. The fastest knockout I've seen live. But in this one, a little bit more of a cautious approach for Ulberg. Volkan Oezdemir himself has one-punch knockout power. Ulberg was able to utilize his jab from the outside as well as leg kicks to kind of out-volume Oezdemir to a unanimous decision victory here. Some people online were saying that this fight was closer than the judges gave it credit for, citing that Volkan Oezdemir was the one pushing the pace the entire fight and making Ulberg fight off the back heel. But Ulberg really was able to stick him with jab and, do some damage to the face of Oezdemir, which people could see by the end of the fight in the third round. I had this one 29-28 for Ulberg. I'm interested to see what your scorecard was, but what do you think of Ulberg now as a prospect? We saw him, perform at his highest potential in St. Louis, kind of brought down to earth a little bit here, but also facing a former title challenger.
Yeah, I definitely underestimated him going in. I didn't pick him. I thought that Volkan Oezdemir would be his toughest test, and I thought Oezdemir would actually finish him. I was wrong there. And yeah, I scored it for Ulberg 29-28 as well.
Yeah, but, for Ulberg, if you look at him right now, the rest of this division, other than Magomed Ankalaev, are predominantly strikers, So I think there are a lot of interesting matchups for him as we look up into the top 10 and top 5 even of this division. Do I think he's going to go stand and trade with Alex Pereira? No, probably not. But he was scheduled for a match with Jamal Hill at one point. That's something that I'd like to see in the future. There's other contenders up there, Nikita Krylov as well, that maybe this guy could go in and compete against. I like Carlos Ulberg a lot. Fresh blood here in the 205-pound division. A young athletic guy with a good frame, 6'3", and he's showing his skills are getting better utilizing that jab in his last fight. So very interested to see what's next for Carlos Ulberg.
For sure, man.
Now, moving down the card, we had Zhang Mingyang. He was able to get another knockout here in the UFC over Ozzy Diaz. That was a good performance on his part. I'm not going to read too much into that one. I don't think Diaz is the highest quality of opponent that we have here in the UFC, but Zhang certainly looked good. And as you were saying, the Chinese crowd was really amped up before the Wong Kong fight, and this was one of the reasons for it. Their guy Zhang getting style points in the first round.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you love to see him when a hometown or home country guy wins in that fashion. This was definitely one that I think a lot of people were very happy about. And, as someone just commented there, him and Ulberg might end up being a fun fight. Which honestly, though, given where Ulberg is, I don't see how that fight makes sense. But if it ever did happen, I wouldn't be opposed to it. So
no, I wouldn't either. And if Zhang can get another win, I think that he's knocking on the doorstep here of getting into the top 15. Ulberg's a little bit higher up the division right now. I think it'd be hard to pitch to the City Kickboxing team and Ulberg to fight a guy who's very dangerous and Zhang, who's outside the rankings right now. He could be inside the rankings as of earlier today. I have not checked, but somebody who's dangerous and a lesser known name, it'd be hard for Ulberg to take that fight at this point, but maybe they are a couple fights away. Now moving down the card here, we had Choi stay. We had Donghoon Choi stay undefeated
on the prelims. You got to show up for the first fight because you might miss a crazy finish if you don't.
The year Salikov, this one, and the one we're about to talk about is just absolutely devastating.
Yeah, I mean there were trying to remember if I did my math correct on this card. There were, I think, out of the 13 fights we had, I think there were 6 knockouts, 6 decisions and 1 submission or some crazy variation like that. So it was definitely a very entertaining card.
Yeah, and even the 1 or 2 fights that didn't go to a finish, they were entertaining as well. So, for the fans who woke up at 2 a.m., they certainly got their money's worth. But we've got to get into this knockout. For my money, it's the most vicious knockout of the year and probably the knockout of the year winner. I had Josh Emmett last year defeating Bryce Mitchell as the knockout of the year just based off how violent it was. This was one of the most violent knockouts you'll ever see. Xing Ming, who actually is a doctor, vicious knockout over Feng Xiaokan.
And by the way, her parents don't even know that she's an MMA fighter.
I know. Isn't that crazy? She doesn't even want to tell him.
That's crazy.
I mean, it's insane, but pays off there. Could she be the next Chinese star? I don't know. I think she's a little small for this weight class. I think if she could drop down.
A, she's a little small for this weight class, and B as well. The question is she marketable outside of her country? That remains to be seen. So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it's too early to say, but again, appreciate the question.
Yeah, as do I. In this fight, though, she may have been losing this fight. If you look at the overall statistics,
she was, I think.
20 strikes down on the significant strike counter before she landed the vicious knockout. You see she was kind of wearing some damage there around the eyes. But, I think she's a good performer, and this was a great performance, with the knockout. But we're just going to have to wait and see, how she can move up the rankings and that sort of thing. But for Feng, this was devastating. I don't know if she can come back from this type of knockout. Was taken out on a stretcher. They said on the broadcast later in the night that she was responsive, was communicating, and she is okay. But I don't know where she can go from here with that knockout victory, or even if she wants to fight again. But Zan, interesting enough, you were there when Valentina Shevchenko knocked out Jessica Ai with a similar kick to the head. Does this kind of remind you of that?
Yeah, I mean it's on levels of that for sure. I mean, that's one of those that will be ingrained in my head for a long time. I mean, I was in person for, when Curtis Blades finished Overeem. I was in person for when Francis knocked out Overeem. I was in person for Valentina versus Jessica. I've seen some brutal knockouts in person. Even though I wasn't in person for this one, this one's up there. So
Yeah.
100%.
Great performance there by Ming, and prayers to Feng, and I hope that she recovers quickly and can continue her career at some point. So this card, as I mentioned, a lot of standout performances. We just saw the knockouts. I think this might have been one of the best fight night cards of the year. What's your overall card rating for this one if you had to give it a score out of 10? I'm up there. I think it's about a 9. I didn't really care that we had to wake up early at 2 a.m. I thought we were rewarded throughout the prelims and into the main card. It was great content throughout, competitive fights and good finishes. What did you make of overall of this card?
I would say an 8.5. If it was at a better start time, I would have given it a 9.
And 4 ounces of freedom, who covers CFFC, and I've seen him at the PFL World Championships last year, says the UFC could use her to launch an atomweight division if they cared enough. I think that that's perfect, man. I think she's a little small for the weight class that she's currently in. I don't know how many other fighters out there they could, put together to make an atomweight division. And as you're saying, I don't think that they really care enough. But I think that her potential might be capped at the current weight class. But thanks for commenting, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Yep.
So we're going to move on here to our second segment. We've got a lot to talk about. We've been all over the PFL playoffs this year. Me and you were both at the card in April, which coincidentally enough, we saw Brendan Loughnane and Timur Khizriev perform in. That's the main event this weekend.
And Musayev as well.
Yeah, and Musayev and Umatov. So, with Brendan Loughnane here, 30-5, facing the undefeated Russian fighter Timur Khizriev. 19 knockouts for Brendan Loughnane. He is not only a striker, but certainly gets it done with the hands more often than not. His last 3 wins, and his wins this year came over Justin Gonzalez, Kai Kamaka, and Pedro Carvalho. His last loss was to Jesus Pinedo, who will be featured on this card as well against Jeremy Kennedy on the prelims. Now, Khizriev has never lost. His wins this year were over Gabriel Braga, Enrique Barzola, and Brett Johns. And I'm going to break this down a little bit by saying I think that Brendan Loughnane, the PFL loves him. He's the face of their organization. But he had the easiest schedule and the easiest path to a title opportunity of anyone in this field, in my opinion. He goes in and is an 8-1 favorite against Pedro Carvalho. He's a huge favorite against Justin Gonzalez. And Kai Kamaka is a great fighter. Credit to him for that win over Kai Kamaka. I was at that fight in Washington, D.C. Kamaka, former UFC and Bellator vet. He's as tough as they come. Very athletic Hawaiian fighter. But Brendan Loughnane was a huge favorite, over 5-1 in his previous 2 contests. Timur Khizriev takes out a guy in Brett Johns, or doesn't take him out, but beats a guy in Brett Johns, who's widely respected, one of the best grapplers, in Europe, and is widely respected in the MMA community. Also took out great competition, as I mentioned, bleeding into this one, with Gabriel Braga and Enrique Barzola. Enrique Barzola, who we've seen in Bellator and is, a very game competitor and a veteran himself. And Gabriel Braga, who has been to a final here in the PFL and is a knockout artist. I've got Timur Khizriev in this one. I'm going to take him by points. It's going to be a hard-fought 25 minutes because Brendan Loughnane is dangerous throughout the fight. But Brendan's going to be, in my opinion, he's going to have to constantly defend against the takedowns of Khizriev. And it's just going to be too much control time for Khizriev in this one. And I'm going to side with him, 28 years old, going up against Brendan, who's 34. Brendan wants to get it back from last year when he lost in the final against Jesus Pinedo. But what do you think of this matchup, Zan? And do you see it kind of for Khizriev like I do?
No, I actually think Khizriev suffers his first loss this Friday, and I think that Loughnane beats him. I think Loughnane is on a revenge tour from last year. He probably feels like he got screwed out of a championship, and I don't think he's going to let that happen again.
Well, that's pretty interesting. You should put some money on that if you want to. But yeah, now what do you think about what I was saying with Brendan's strength of schedule? Because I really do think that's a factor. And one of the reasons
you're not wrong, but I would counter you in saying that experience is experience no matter who you fight. And I'm not saying this guy Kizriev doesn't have any, but when you have years and years and years of PFL experience, even going all the way back to his lone Dana White Contender Series appearance, that's a career, man. 30-5 is nothing to sweat at. And
No.
I just think competition wise, I think Wang Ning has fought better competition than Kizriev overall. And I just think across, a longer fight, a 25-minute fight, a fight where, you can get into the trenches. I just feel like Wang Ning is one of those guys that understands where he went wrong last year and knows what he needs to fix. And and he was talking about this fight or this moment being in the championship, as early as when we were there in April. He was already talking about the finals this fall, and now we're the week of the fight. I mean, if that isn't manifestation, I don't know what is. So I feel confident in picking him.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Kizriev in Bellator on 2 separate occasions, and then again with the PFL. I just think that he's so athletic. He's on the come up right now. But a point that you made, this will be Kizriev's first 5-round fight. Brendan Loughnane has been, the 5-round distance before. He's been scheduled for 5 rounds. But I'm interested to see how Timur Kizriev's cardio holds up over 25 minutes because I think that he's not going to be able to submit Brendan Loughnane. We don't really see Kizriev as a guy who gets people to the ground and gets them out of there with these crazy submissions. He more controls you and uses his kickboxing on the feet and mixes in takedowns. He's a great mixed martial artist. I don't think that he can finish Brendan by submission, but I think that over 25 minutes he's going to wear on him enough to get a decision victory in his own right. So that's going to be a great fight, kind of a striker versus grappler contest there. Dagestan is beatable. Yeah, I mean, Brendan's good, man. He's got 19 knockouts. He's dangerous. And if Kizriev doesn't mind his P's and Q's on the feet, he can get put to sleep like Brendan's done to a lot of guys. So it's a great main event, and it's going to be an interesting featherweight fight over 5 rounds. So moving down the card here, we've got a great women's matchup here between Tayla Santos and Dakota Ditcheva. Dakota Ditcheva comes into this as an undefeated 13-0, as Tayla Santos is now 22-3. Ditcheva's last 3 wins come over Jenna Bishop, Chelsea Hackett, and Lisa Mundane, while Santos's last 3 wins come over Liz Carmouche, Jenna Bishop, and Awara Jolane. Now, Santos has not lost since leaving the UFC, left the UFC on a 2-fight skid to Valentina Shevchenko and Erin Blanchfield. Obviously in the rearview mirror, those losses don't look too bad. Shevchenko obviously is an all-time great, and Erin Blanchfield is someone who is on the come-up. Now, I was there in Nashville when Dakota Ditcheva knocked out Jenna Bishop. Jenna Bishop is a world jiu-jitsu champion and one of the best grapplers that the PFL in the PFL women's divisions. Tayla Santos, if we look at this fight stylistically, he's going to have to get this to the ground. Ditcheva is a tremendously athletic striker. She's mean on the feet. And now with the ability to use elbows, I can't wait to see how, her performance looks like, with that weapon in her arsenal as well. I like Dakota Ditcheva in this one. I think she's got potential to be the face of the PFL. They are putting all their eggs in the Dakota Ditcheva basket. They have her on all the social media. She's at all the events sitting in the front row. Really a staple of this promotion. And if she can get a world championship here against Tayla Santos, who was a former UFC title challenger, and a lot of people thought that she beat Shevchenko in that fight. I had that fight scored for her as well in that championship contest. But Dakota Ditcheva here, 25 years old. It's not like Tayla Santos is, some over-the-hill fighter either. She's a great competitor and probably a top 5 overall talent in the world in this weight class. But I'm going to take Dakota Ditcheva in this one by knockout. I don't think Tayla Santos gets it to the ground, and I think Dakota Ditcheva makes a name for herself with this performance this weekend.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you here as well. I like Tayla Santos. And this is no disrespect to Dakota Ditcheva, but I just don't think her level of competition this year has been all that good. I understand she's undefeated. She's won impressively her last few fights, but I just think, as someone who believes that Santos beat Valentina Shevchenko a couple years ago, I think that's still in the back of her head, and I think she knows that she's the better fighter holistically than Ditcheva, and I think she's going to showcase that. I think as long as Santos, kind of stays at distance, takes her to the ground, and avoids the early storm, I actually think that she can win this fight. So I'm going to take her across a 5-round unanimous decision.
Yeah, I have not been this excited for one of the fights in the PFL. Like I kind of knew Francis was going to get that win over Henin. I was excited for that fight, but since this one was, these girls got through the bracket here and it was, decided they were going to fight each other in Nashville, I've been super excited for this one. Do you think Dakota is for real? Could she, if she went to the UFC, make a real run, or just PFL champ material? We're going to find out this weekend, man, and that's what I'm saying. We've had Taila Santos in the UFC competing against the best of the best. Erin Blanchfield, Valentina Shevchenko were the last 2 losses, but those are respectable contenders. Taila Santos, as I mentioned, I think she's a top 5, top 10 talent in the world. And if Dakota Ditcheva can go and do what she has done to everyone else so far to Taila Santos, I think the PFL has, a real name in Dakota Ditcheva that they can push forward on a lot of these events coming next year.
Yeah, so, that I can't disagree with. She just needs to show me a little bit more, and this is her toughest test. Yeah. So pretty much my message to her is prove me wrong and I'll shut up because right now I just, until I see this fight, I haven't seen enough from Dakota Ditcheva. But that's just me though. So
yeah, and I mean, maybe if she got matched up with Liz Carmouche in the semis and she was able to get past Liz, we'd have a little bit more validity to where she could go in her career, knowing how good Liz is. But Taila Santos was the one who beat Liz Carmouche, which was also a very great win, like you were saying, in terms of strength of schedule. It seems like our opinion's a little flip-flop. I went with Kizriev due to strength of schedule. You're going with Santos due to strength of schedule. So it'll be interesting to see how those fights play out if you are putting a wager in this weekend. Moving down the card here, we have another UFC veteran in Impa Kasanganay, 18-4, taking on Dovled Yagshimuradov, who's a Bellator veteran and has not lost since 2021 in a contest against Carl Albertson. Impa's last 3 wins come over Josh Silveira, Jacob Neto, and Alex Polizzi, another Bellator veteran, as Dovled has beaten Rob Wilkerson, Simon Biong, and Jacob Neto as well. So this one, I don't know how you see it, but I think Yagshimuradov has been on an impressive run as of late. He's good on the ground. He actually, for a guy his size and his strength, is able to do spinning wheel kicks and techniques that you don't normally see out of someone with his bulkier build. Now, Impa Kasanganay, his last loss was to Johnny Eblen. That's no slouch. Johnny Eblen, undefeated, one of the best in the world, middleweight champion. But I like Impa in this one. Dovled's on a hot streak. Impa's a great athletic striker. He's got good takedown defense. If he keeps this one standing, that's kind of where I think this fight's either won or lost. I think Impa's going to be good enough to keep Dovled from taking him to the ground. But who do you think is the superior striker in this one?
I like Impa here to win this fight. I just think obviously he has more championship level experience. He's the defending champion from last season. And I just think he believes in himself that he's one of the best 205ers in the world. And Dove is a stud too. It's gonna be a great fight. But I just think right now Impa has so much momentum, and he kind of knows there's a chip on his shoulder since the Eblen loss. And I think he'll be able to get it done. It's gonna be a great fight, and I can guarantee you that this fight is not going the distance. No way. If you want to make sure that you win at least a little bit of money, I would bet an inside the distance prop on these two.
Yeah, and I was really impressed with Yagshimuradov and his win over Rob Wilkinson. Wilkinson, a guy who before that contest had not lost since it was to Israel Adesanya in Israel Adesanya's UFC debut. So I put a lot of stock into that one. I like Impa Kasanganay in this one. I'm going to have to disagree with you. I think that this one's going to go to the distance. I think both of these guys are very tough competitors. I don't see Impa getting finished, and I also don't see Dovled Yagshimuradov getting finished either. But to your point, this is not going to be an unentertaining fight. And I believe this one could be fight of the night. It's one that's kind of flying under the radar. In a couple other matchups like the Dicheva and Santos, we've got stylistic differences that maybe can make for a boring fight. But in this one, I think you're going to get a striking affair between two pretty athletic and powerful guys. So look out for that, fight fans. It should be fireworks. Moving down to the welterweight world championship. In that weight class, we have Magomed Umatov, 17-0, versus another undefeated fighter from Russia, Shamil Musayev, 19-0-1. I cannot wait for this matchup between these two undefeated Russian fighters. Magomed's last 3 wins are over Neiman Gracie, Brennan Ward, and Andrei Koreshkov, which we saw in the main event in April, while Musayev knocked out Logan Storley on that card and also defeated Ramazan Ramazanov twice during the PFL playoffs. I didn't really like that he got matched up against the same guy twice. That was kind of a stale point for me. But nonetheless, Shamil Musayev is a silver medalist in wrestling in Russia and for their national wrestling. And is great on the ground, has significant power. We saw that against Logan Storley. Logan Storley was not able to get him down, and Musayev got him out of there really quickly. As he did Ramazan Ramazanov. I think the same thing could happen in this matchup with Umatov, who we saw in that fight with Neiman Gracie, isn't the greatest striker in the world, kind of depends on the takedown. Will he be able to get it against Shamil Musayev? I don't believe he will. I think Musayev wins this one by knockout. 25 minutes with the amount of power that Musayev has, I think that's going to be too much of a danger. And I think Umatov will suffer his first defeat. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Musayev wins by knockout as well, and I think it's going to be one of the most entertaining fights in the card. I actually have him winning by knockout in the second round, a little bit more specifically.
Really? So you don't think that Umatov gets the grappling going whatsoever against Musayev?
I mean, I think he does in the first round, but it's very, very brief. I think he'll take him down for maybe 40 seconds, but Musayev is going to have worked on his takedown, and so get up right away, and then his striking prowess, I guess, will start and then eventually finish early in the second. So,
yeah, and Musayev, before this PFL season, he really burst on the scene out of nowhere. A lot of us, at least in the American, fan base, weren't really familiar with Shamil Musayev. But after knocking out Logan Storley, taking the O from Ramazan Ramazanov, and then beating him again in their rematch, he's really made a name for himself this season. That is going to be a fantastic 175-pound contest this weekend. Now, moving down to 155 pounds, we've got 2 more fights left here for the PFL World Championships. We've got Brent Primus, 15-3, former Bellator champion, taking on Gadzi Rabadanov, the Dagestani fighter, who's 23-4-2. We've seen Rabadanov compete on the Ryzen versus Bellator card last year. He picked up a win there, as well as a couple wins in Bellator before coming over and running the table in this playoffs. Now, the last 3 wins, they have some similar opponents. Solomon Renfro, each of them picked up a victory over, while Primus beat Clay Collard and Bruno Miranda. Rabadanov beat Michael Dufort and Elvin Espinoza. Espinoza came into that fight with an undefeated record. I like Gadzi Rabadanov in this one. I think he's very well-rounded, 31 years old. Brent Primus has been there. He's seen it. He's done it all. He beat Michael Chandler with those leg kicks at Madison Square Garden. He's became the champion. But Brent Primus's last loss is against Usman Nurmagomedov, who may be the best fighter in the world at this weight class. We don't know. Obviously, he trains with Islam Makhachev as well. But one of the best fighters in the world, Primus was able to go the distance, maybe even was more competitive than Alexander Shabley, who we saw take a crack at Usman Nurmagomedov earlier this year. I like Gadzi in this one. I think that he's going to be able to get Brent to the ground. Brent's really good on his back submission-wise. He was able to get Mansour Bonari out of there with the submission. So he's very tricky, but I like Rabadanov in this one. What about you, Zam?
I do as well. I think the wrestling is going to dictate the pace of the fight, and I think Primus is going to be given no room to breathe. I think that Rabadanov wins a clear decision, 4-1, 5-0, whatever he wants. It's going to be a very one-sided fight. So,
yeah, I'm right where you're at. If Primus can stop the takedown in this one, it's going to make things really interesting. Primus is a good competitor with his hands. He's not, somebody who's known for knocking people out. Got that knockout win over Michael Chandler with leg kicks. I think he's going to have to utilize those leg kicks against Godzi to try and keep him off him. If Godzi can get on the inside and force him up against the cage, it could be a long night for Brent Primus. Dude Wipes, the OG MMA sponsor.
true. Good point.
All right, so we've got one last championship fight, and it is the heavyweight contest. Maybe the next competitor to face Francis Ngannou, we don't know. Denis Goltsov, 35-8 versus Oleg Popov, 19-1. Both of these guys are Russian competitors. Goltsov picked his 3 wins up over Tim Johnson, Thiago Santos, and Linton Vassell. His last loss came against Renan Ferreira, while Popov has the longest win streak in MMA currently, 17 wins in a row. Last 3 victories over Linton Vassell, Davion Franklin, and Steve Mowry. Now, I like Steve Mowry. I thought that Oleg Popov showed a really great performance in that one, finishing Steve Mowry, who we've seen, in Bellator. He's not a terrible competitor at all. He's actually pretty competitive. At least he was towards the upper echelon in Bellator at the time. But Oleg Popov avenges the loss of his teammate Valentin Meldovsky to Linton Vassell in the semifinals, took him down throughout that fight at ease. But I don't think he's going to find takedowns as easy against Goltsov, who is 6'5" and has a significant height and reach advantage on him. This one I see for Goltsov. I think that the height and the reach and the length is just going to be too much. Goltsov is a combat sambo world champion himself, so he's got a credentialed ground game to kind of stymie what Oleg is coming at him with. I'm going to take Goltsov in this one, but if Oleg Popov can get it done, that record's going to look pretty good at 20-1 opposite Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, I actually like Popov here to keep his winning streak afloat. I think this is going to be a great fight. I think someone is getting finished viciously, and I think it's going to be whoever's gas tank goes first. And I actually think it's going to be Goltsov. I think both of these two are going to come out guns blazing, and I think Popov is going to find an opening. I think he's one of the most underrated stories in MMA, one of the best heavyweights outside the UFC, and I actually think if he were to fight Francis, he could give him trouble just because, his movement is interesting. He kind of comes at you with feints and is very, very elusive. And, kind of it's a style that Francis may have never fought before. That's a hypothetical matchup that I would like to see personally. But I wouldn't also be opposed to see Goltsov win. I think these two are very evenly matched. The records may be a surprise to a layperson, but we can promise you that both of these guys have solid track records. And I think this is a chance to be a really good fight.
Yeah, I do too. I actually see this one ending in finish. Now, obviously, it's a heavyweight contest scheduled for 25 minutes. It's probably not going to go the distance. But, I think this is going to be a great fight as well. What do you make of the size disadvantage here for Popov? Do you think it's going to be hard for him to get Goltsov to the ground due to the frame, obviously being 6'5"?
I don't even think he'll need to take him down, to be quite honest with you.
Really?
I don't even think he'll need to use his wrestling. I think he'll stuff 2 takedowns and then he'll finish him. Let's see. We'll finish him early in the 3rd round. It'll be an interesting and very close fight. You could even see it be 1-1 going into the 3rd round. I actually don't think it goes the full 25.
Yeah, I don't either. So that's what we have for the PFL World Championships. Also, if you guys want to see the return of 2023 champion Jesus Pinedo, he'll be facing Bellator veteran Jeremy Kennedy on the prelims. So make sure to tune in early if you want to catch that contest as well. Now, we've got a little bit of controversy coming out of the PFL. We talk about the good before we get, to breaking down the bad. Some of these Bellator fighters that they've acquired have been pretty vocal over the last week, Zan. I'm sure you've seen what Pitbull, Patchy Mix, who we see here on the screen, Corey Anderson from the city of Chicago, just like you. I'm sure you see what these guys are saying. Here's Anderson's quote. Aging like warm cheese over here, waiting for PFL to give me a call. But don't get it twisted. We still ready to defend the strap against anybody, young or old. You'd like to see these guys get a paycheck more than once or twice a year. Obviously, they were getting paid more than that and getting more, consistent fights when they were with Bellator and Showtime. But that's no longer the landscape anymore. PFL has purchased them. They elect to keep the Bellator brand open, at least for the time being. What do you make of Corey Anderson and some of these comments? We'll break down Corey first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a horrible situation. Coming from his perspective, he was the first champ from Illinois in quite some time when he won the belt earlier this year. And yeah, I mean, it's really disappointing. He should, be active at this point in his career. He's trying to rebuild himself, post UFC years. And it's just really disappointing. I mean, this merger was supposed to be, a joint venture between oh yeah, that's actually a solid point too. I actually forgot about that. Thanks for mentioning it. But with that being said, though, I just feel like not even just him, all these guys that we're about to go through, they're getting the short end of the stick, and it's not their fault. And it sucks because some of these guys are in the prime of their careers, where a guy like Corey Anderson, he's already been in the UFC. He doesn't really have any other options to really go unless he wants to obviously, obviously if he wants to give up the money that hopefully he'll end up getting paid soon. I think the big issue here is is just the lack of transparency is the real sad part. And I think most of that can be said for almost every guy we're about to go over in just a second.
Yeah, why are these guys the best people in this organization who they purchased? Why are they out in the wind like they don't know what's going on? When they're supposed to be the face of this new organization that you're having stick around for God knows what reason. If these guys were, put into the playoff this year or put into the regular season, that would have made it a lot more interesting for everybody and built the PFL brand solely instead of kind of leaving these guys out to dry in Bellator. We've seen Michael Venom Page jump ship. We've seen some other guys jump ship as well. I mean, if you see what's going on with one championship, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these guys try to ask out of contracts moving forward. Patchy Mix is one of the best 135-pound fighters in the world, regardless of organization. He has to get more than one fight a year. He's got to be able to prove that, and he's got to be able to make a good living while he's still in his prime. We were there when Patchy Mix beat Sergio Pettis, jumped off the cage with him in back control and submitted him. He's a wizard on the ground. And someone who could compete well with the Sean O'Malley's in the strikers in the UFC at 135 pounds. Now, Pitbull is a legend of the sport. You have to have respect for Pitbull. Anybody, he tried to be the first 3-weight world champion in MMA history. He is a 2-weight world champion in Bellator. I believe he has the most knockouts in Bellator history as well. I mean, this guy's on the Mount Rushmore of this sport, and if he's sitting there saying, what he's saying, we'll get the quote here in a minute from Pitbull. Pitbull says, "This is wrong. We need answers. We need the fighters and fans to be respected. This is not a game or just some business. These are people's lives we are talking about. A serious promotion would give fighters the chance to fight at least 3 times per year if they're healthy." I think that in this offseason, the PFL is really going to have to sit with their team and find out what kind of structure they want moving forward with these Bellator fighters. Because if you lose these 3 guys as your champion, that just looks terrible to you. You've lost Kayla Harrison. Michael Venom Page elected to not come over. You got to keep some of the talent that you acquired, or why did you even acquire the talent to begin with?
Well said. I don't really think I have anything else to add other than the fact that the UFC might be calling sooner than these guys may think if this keeps going down the path that it might go. So,
and I'd be welcome to Pitbull making a last run at 145 pounds in the UFC. Now, I know it's going to take him a minute to get to the top of the division, probably 3 or 4 fights, but it looks like he's wanting 3 or 4 fights a year. So maybe this is the right time for Patricio Pitbull and Patchy Mix who knows, maybe the PFL will let them out of their contracts. That's definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward before next year. But that's our episode for this week, fight fans. You can catch the Combat Connection here on the Cageside Press social media platforms weekly, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for joining me today, Zain. It's a pleasure, as always, to talk with you, and I'm glad we could do this again.
For sure, absolutely, anytime. Congratulations on episode 1 of a new era. Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll see you guys next time, fight fans. Appreciate you.